The whole idea is to start thinking about utilizing your sales career very purposefully to start building and designing and funding the next stages of your career and life on your terms. And a part of that is proper financial and wealth management. What we'd like to now open the aperture on with Rob is to start thinking about, well, what is a proper way to build a system around managing your finances, especially as it relates to variable income. So, without further ado, he's going to walk us through his financial operating system.
This is the personal financial operating system. Okay. Now, when Brandon and I were talking, one of the things that Brandon and I really kind of hit it off with is just this idea of purposefulness. This idea of time, attention, energy, and money. They're all finite resources, right? We've all got to make the most of them. So let's make sure that we're being purposeful with them. And so today, of course, we're going to be focusing predominantly on money. Brandon said this in our conversation as we were prepping for this. He said, I want to help turn money into a tool, not just a status symbol. And I love that, because if money is just a status symbol, it's not going to have the power to really transform and change our lives. You're in a position as a tech sales professional where you have the ability to create incredible income. That's awesome. Let's make sure that you make the most of it to get you to freedom as quickly as possible and really enjoy it. Some background here real quick, just who I am: CPA, CFP, level 1 CFA, bunch of different experience. All this is a bunch of extra acronyms that says I've worked with a lot of people with a lot of money for a long time. Everything from my own podcast where I just interviewed ultra successful individuals to working in public accounting at the highest levels. Like right now, I have multiple billionaire and multi-centimillionaire clients that I work with on a daily and weekly, monthly basis, helping them from a tax planning perspective, but also strategically planning for their wealth and their future, for them and their families. What I'm hoping to do today is take all of this experience of talking with these individuals, understanding their stories, and distill it down to a framework that you can use in your own financial life. At a high level, this is that framework, okay? It's your personal financial operating system. Stage one is just have good foundations. Just like a house can't be built without a good foundation, we need a good financial foundation. Step two, acceleration. Once we've got the foundation, we're going to take off like a rocket ship off that foundation. And then stage three, use that to create the freedom in the life that you want. Okay, now today we're going to be focusing predominantly on these two steps to get us there. Stage one, financial foundations. Financial foundations is really trying to help us answer two questions. How am I doing? What should I do? And am I ready to jump? I'm going to show you what I do with my own clients for this stage one, the financial foundations, making sure they've got a good solid foundation. And then I'm going to give you a couple of metrics that you can take today that you can immediately implement in your own financial life to use to assess your own financial foundation. Okay. So I use a tool called Elements. It's a fancy app that you can put on your phone. It takes you just a few minutes to put all your information in. It gives me a bunch of data, basically telling us how are you doing relative to everyone else that I work with as well, but also the general public, which is really nice. Kind of helping us see, are you low, high, in a healthy range for all these scores. And at the beating heart of it all is this right here. This is what's called the Elements scorecard. Think of this as like a baseball card. Basically, this is your financial stats. Each row tells us a different bit of information. We call this the risk row, the cash flow row, and our term row here. Now, for today, what we're going to be doing is just focusing on these numbers right here that I'm going to give you to walk away with. These are the cash flow scores. Okay. So the cash flow scores are just helping us understand where is our cash flow actually going. In theory, if everything is working together, these should equal 100%. And it's helping us answer the questions, how am I doing and what should I do? Okay. How am I doing? Am I spending way too much? That's what our burn rate is here. Do I have way too much going to my debt? Am I paying too much in taxes? Am I saving enough generally? Now, I know from having conversations with Brandon that he encourages a really high savings rate, keeping that burn under control. And so what I'm going to do here is give you a quick, simple formula. Take any of these, divide it by your total spending, and that will give you these scores. In theory, if you know these numbers well, they should all add up to 100%. They also have specific ranges that could be really valuable for you to keep in mind. This is taking our total cash flow, trying to help us understand where is our money going? How am I doing? Savings rate should be greater than 10%. If it's less than 10%, well, hey, how am I doing? Well, I probably should be saving more. Or what should I be doing? Probably increasing that savings rate. Burn rate between 35 and 50%. If you want to be part of Brandon's crew, going from level 1 to level 2, trying to really take off and level up your financial life, well, try to get that burn rate under 35%. I'm not saying don't live your life. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. That's why I do this one-on-one with my clients to understand, does that make sense for your long-term goals? But at a minimum, get in that range. Debt under 35%. That's going to be an anchor to you. It can either be a tool or an anchor, depending on how you use it. In your personal life, it can be an anchor. For your assets, it can be rocket fuel. And lastly, tax rate, roughly 24%. If it's much higher than that, you need to do some serious tax planning. You need to get some help. Not just a tax preparer, get a tax planner. The next scores are these two down here. These are what we call our term scores here on the very bottom. Term meaning time. Okay. At first, that might seem a little odd. Why do we have something that's measuring time here in our scores? But what they do is they help us understand the number, if we're ready to jump, make that jump from I'm working at my job and I want to go start that other business. I want to do what Brandon's doing and start doing some coaching and consulting on the side and pull back a little bit. Am I in a position to be able to do so? And these two numbers kind of work in tandem to help us figure that out. Okay. What they are is they're effectively both a portion of our net worth divided by our spending. And so those that are kind of thinking about this, you're probably looking at that and going, wait a second. So liquid term, this is our liquid assets. This is a measure of how much available powder do I have on the sidelines to be able to help me and have a little cushion if I decide to pull back or if I lose my job. Total term, this is telling us, okay, this is all of our net worth, everything all together. How are we doing on this? Where are we? How many years worth of our spending do we currently have sitting aside waiting for us? And if we want to be able to make a big jump, as a general rule of thumb, you want your liquid term to be at least half a year's worth of spending. If you talk to any financial planner, they're going to tell you, well, how much in terms of emergency fund should we have? Well, 3 to 6 months. Generally, if you're going to be using it for making some sort of a jump, whether that's, like we said, starting a business or anything else, you want at least half a year waiting for you. And then total term is about 25. Think of it as like a freedom number. Is anyone here familiar with the 4% rule, the financial world? If you have a financial advisor, you may have heard of that term. Okay, Cody raised his hand. Cody, what's the 4% rule? Do you remember off the top of your head?
If I remember correctly, it's like a safe withdrawal rate, right? You can withdraw up to 4% of your total assets to live off of without running out of money.
Correct. That's exactly right. Total term is the 4% rate inverted. If you go 1 divided by 4%, you get 25. So this is effectively the same exact type of thing. It's just a simplified form that for most people is just a little bit easier to understand. So if you got 25, we got 25 years worth of living expenses. It's about a 4% withdrawal rate. We're doing all right. So if you wanted to use this to kind of measure how am I doing in terms of creating wealth over time, this becomes a fantastic way to be able to do that. Once you know kind of where you're at and how you're doing generally, now we can build off the foundation to start to accelerate financially into our lives. To create what I call my process that I do with my clients to help them start to accelerate, I call it freedom planning. So to accelerate your life financially, you have these 5 pieces: purposeful design, asset selection, portfolio design, tax planning, and risk strategy. They all need to be done together and work interchangeably to help you accelerate as quickly as possible. I'm going to walk you through each of these and give you tips on every single one of them. So if you just want to implement it yourself, you can go ahead and start to do these various pieces to help you accelerate long term. Okay. So the very first one is purposeful design. Everything starts with understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's the combination of values and vision. Where do I want to go? What does it look like? How's it going to taste and smell? What do I want people to say about me at the very end of my life? That those two blend together to create your mission statement, your financial mission statement. Now, I do this a lot of times with couples. And so I have couples do the exercises of values and vision independently and then come together to establish their united mission statement together. And here's just some quick tips. For the values, you want 5, no more than 5, because then you start going all over the place. You want to whittle it down, focus. What are my things that I'm actually really most important to me? I gave you this link here. You guys will get access to these slides afterwards. You can click on it. It's actually a free quiz that you can go through that'll help you figure out what your values are. Next, vision. When it comes to your vision, here are some questions that you should ask yourself when you're thinking of that long-term vision. I have a whole 3-page document that my clients and I will go through, like I said, individually and together to kind of flush all this out. But here's a great place to get started. What do we want in life? What do we not want? Sometimes it's easier to say what we don't want versus what we do want to help us, ultimately find that answer. What does an average day look like? And what do I want people to say at the end of my life? If we can start to think that long-term, place ourselves out in the future, we can then start to back into how we're going to get to where we want to go. If we don't know where we want to go, if we don't have the vision, we don't have those values to guide us, we're never going to be able to get ultimately where we want to go. And lastly, here's stuff around mission statement. When you're creating a mission statement, just keep it simple, keep it concise, make it yours. If we come back to our flywheel, the next 2 pieces were asset selection and portfolio design. Now, these go hand in hand. And so I want to kind of lay some groundwork here really quick and then kind of build off of this. The reason why we do asset selection and portfolio design is because we're trying to create wealth, whether for yourself personally, for your family, or whatever your long-term goals might be. But you have to understand that there's actually 2 different approaches to wealth building. There's wealth creation and there's wealth preservation. And if you don't have strategies, asset selection and portfolio design for both of them, you're likely going to find yourself going between the two of them and not being successful in either of them very well. Let me give you some quick tips for understanding the difference between the two of them and how to understand them. A wealth creation perspective, it's all about concentration. Okay, a lot of people think of terms of diversification. And yes, diversification is very powerful, but you notice it's over here. It's in the preservation stage. When we're creating wealth, we are concentrating. You're going all in, right? You're likely going all in on your tech sales career in order to grow it, grow the income that's there. You're concentrating. You think of any of the wealthiest individuals in history, it's because they concentrated. Elon Musk, what does he have? Tesla, SpaceX, a couple other things. Think about Steve Jobs. What is he known for? Apple. I always think of like Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller. Like those are names that we know from 100 years ago because they went all in on oil or steel, or Henry Ford went all in on cars. It's about concentration. In addition, not only are you concentrating, you need to pick your wealth creation strategy. And for some people, they love cash flow. For others, it's all about just grow, and I want the biggest pile as possible. Then eventually I'll turn it into some cash flow. Okay, but you need to be purposeful. Which one am I going after? What is going to be my approach? Next, you need some criteria when it comes to concentration. When you're on that growth strategy, you've got your one thing, but it can be so easy to get distracted. And even within your one lane, it can be so easy to start to adopt other things and start to dilute your power. And so you need criteria. I recommend at least a minimum of 5 criteria to help you start to sort and sift all those opportunities that are going to come as you're in the creation process to help not get you distracted. This next one here, risk levers. Here, this idea, higher return, higher risk, right? Lower return, lower risk. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now that's false. It's not true. In some asset classes, it can be, but not necessarily. I've got plenty of clients where we've had plenty of investments where it was incredibly high return and incredibly low risk. And let me tell you why. It's because of these 4 keys right here. Okay. If you want to reduce the risk of any investment, especially when you're in that creation phase and you're trying to grow as quickly as possible, and you've concentrated yourself, have as much knowledge as possible about that investment that you're making. Okay. Have some control over that investment. Want to know why people feel like the stock market is very risky? Well, because they have little to no control over the outcome of those investments, right? It just feels like you're at the whim of Mr. Market. That's the phrase that you hear a lot of times. Next, speed. And speed in how quickly you get your money back. Once again, I'm just going to kind of pick on the stock market here because it's easy. But think of like a bond investment. What do they pay? Maybe 6% in today's day and age. Okay, how many years is it going to take for you to get your money back? 14-ish years, more? 15, 16, 17, 18 years. It's a long time. But what if you can get your money back in 2 years and then everything you're making after that is just house money? Okay, that feels like a lot less risky. And then lastly, money invested. If you're putting 50% of your net worth in versus 5% of your net worth into an investment, the 50% one's going to feel a lot more risky. There's going to be a lot more writing on it, right? So if we can learn how to make investments at a smaller scale, that also give us greater speed, more control, and we have really good knowledge about it, suddenly it doesn't matter how concentrated we are, it's a lot less risky. Let's switch over to the other side here, wealth preservation. So on one side we have creation, on the other side we have preservation. Preservation is almost a flip in a lot of situations. Like we talked about before, concentration versus diversity. Strategy selection is also totally different. In the creation phase, we probably have one strategy that we're focusing on. In the preservation phase, we're not going to start to open up and allow other outside professional managers perhaps to come in and help us and figure out how to preserve these assets, because that diversification, meaning assets in multiple places, in multiple different buckets, multiple different asset classes, multiple different timeframes, all becomes very powerful in helping us protect what we have created. Next, low costs, properly allocated, regularly rebalanced. These are 3 principles that you'll find if you talk to any financial advisor. These are the things that they're constantly talking about, because at the end of the day, a financial advisor is there to help you preserve your money, not make a lot of money for you. Your job is to create it. Their job will be to preserve it for you. Now, in the asset selection, this is just the beginning of a process that I take my clients through. Investing is a beautiful thing, but it is also an incredibly confusing thing because there are so many options. And this is just 2 phases of a 3 or 4 part quiz that I take with my clients through, where we ultimately look at 30 different possible potential investment options for them that stem off of all of these. You can see the big 3 here: real estate, business, and stock market. Your job in the asset selection and portfolio creation process is to figure out, where do I want to focus on creating my wealth, and where do I want to focus in terms of preserving my wealth? Do I want to be focused on the equity? Do I want to be focused on cash flow? And so what I do is I take my clients through a process by which we figure that out for them personally. Once again, visions, values, mission statement, using that to guide us to figure out, okay, what is the type of life that we want to create? And therefore, what are the assets then will then help us create that life based off of what we actually want? Once we know the asset classes that we want to invest in, then we can start to figure out what is the actual percentages that make sense to create the life that we want. This is actually an example from one of my clients. We had gone through the whole process, and we ultimately created, this was what the perfect portfolio would look like for them. And we take, okay, where are we at currently? What does that look like in comparison to our current? Okay, great. Then we need to make a plan to get us there to that desired investment allocation long term. Tax planning. This is the difference between tax planning and tax preparation. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tools, little tax strategies that you can use as a W-2 employee that, based off of your last month's conversation, the multifamily real estate, might be important to keep in mind. Okay, so the first one here is tax professional status. I love investing in real estate, but one of the things that people don't realize from a tax perspective is that if you invest in, let's say, multifamily syndication real estate, you are going to be what's considered a limited partner. And from the tax law perspective, that income or those losses that real estate generates for you, like you probably touted, because everyone in real estate loves to talk about 1031 exchanges and cost segregation analyses and the losses that real estate can create for you. It's fantastic. But if you are a limited partner, if you invest in real estate in a more passive form, you get what's called passive income. And that income cannot be offset against your W-2 income. It just sits there waiting until you sell that investment, and then it can eventually be used against your W-2 income. Woof, right? There's nothing worse than saying, hey, I want to reduce some of my taxes from my commissions here, and I'm going to invest in some real estate, only to find out at the end of the year that it doesn't actually do that for you. Now, here are 2 ways in which we can get around this. Number 1, tax professional status. If you are married, you can have your spouse be in charge of your real estate investment portfolio. And there's 12 different activities that they can do that would constitute them being a real, well, I said tax professional, right? This is my brain too late at night as I'm putting this together. Let's just say real estate professional status, okay? And in a real estate professional status, they're able to actually take any losses against that real estate and automatically offset it against your W-2 income. That's fantastic. All of the losses that your real estate creates can be offset against your W-2 income. Another little loop here is what we call the short-term rental loophole. This is saying, hey, as long as your short-term rentals fit certain specific criteria, which is any good tax professional will be able to help you figure that out pretty quickly, all of the losses that come from your short-term rentals can now be offset against your W-2 income. 2 little loopholes that, as long as you set your life up properly, you can take advantage of, and that real estate income or real estate losses that you wouldn't normally be able to deduct against your W-2 income now becomes deductible. That's pretty sweet. One of the things that we do with all my clients is that once we have designed the asset allocation and the portfolio allocation, and we've gone through all the purpose creation, and we've got them a solid foundation, we say, okay, great. Now that we know where we want to go, let's then set up our lives from a tax perspective to make sure that we do it in the best way possible, get the lowest tax bill as we're going along doing that. The last piece here in this freedom planning is the risk strategy. Okay, once we have all these other pieces in place, we now need to make sure that we don't expose ourselves. Like, think about our armor, right? We don't want to have our underside completely exposed. And there's lots of things that go into a risk perspective. If you go and talk to financial advisors, they're probably going to focus their conversation on life insurance, and life insurance is important. It's a part of the conversation. You need to understand what you have, or if someone comes to you and is trying to sell you let's go with a permanent universal whole life policy, and you can be your own bank, infinite banking. Does it make sense for your personal life and where you're actually trying to go? Does it actually work? That becomes really, really important. I'd say even in addition to that, what's really important is this estate planning piece here. If you don't have a will, some sort of generic, what we call a defective trust, powers of attorney in place, you need to get those in place. Go find yourself an estate planning attorney for the sake of your children, for your family. Keep your assets out of the court system. Go get those basic things in place. A will on its own is not enough. A trust on its own is not enough. Power of attorney on its own is not enough. You need all three. Go get all three.
A quick tip on this one. I actually did this through my old employer. There
Mhm.
are services that you actually might be paying for unbeknownst to you that come along with your benefits. So I would check with that or check with your HR person.
Two things real quick before we move on from this. Disability insurance. This is something that most people do not have, but just as a heads up, disability insurance is actually the most used insurance other than your car and home insurance in the country. If you haven't had a conversation with someone about it, if you don't have someone that you can trust, find someone, talk to them. This could be something that might be worth, kind of depending on what it is that you do, the industries that you're in, could be something to consider. Lastly, entities. Think of this as, I'm going to go start my new business. Should I be in a C Corp or an S Corp, or is it a partnership, or what does this look like? How do I go about doing all those things? In my job now that I do at Ernst & Young, the use of entities is one of the most important things that we discuss when it comes from a tax perspective. And in that tax conversation, depending on what you're trying to do, it can be really important. So what I've done is I went and found this. There's a YouTube channel that I love called How Money Works. It's fantastic. If you're at all interested in finance and money, it's really fun. I really like it. He breaks stuff down into really simple, easy to understand concepts. And he had this in one of his videos. I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I've always wanted a simple visual to be able to use to explain to people what does the perfect entity structure look like. And then the short answer is this is exactly what it looks like. Even for my billionaire clients, this is what the perfect entity structure looks like. And I'm going to say perfect because you likely don't need all of these things. But just so you know, this is eventually what the end game would look like. And you can start to even create some of these things. Like I mentioned before, right? Like a trust. Here's a trust. The trust is sitting right here. And a trust is incredibly powerful from both a tax and a risk mitigation purpose. But like even with all my clients, I start here and I say, okay, this is the end perfect goal. But for yourselves, this is what you've got. Here's where we need to start to move in the direction to kind of maybe get you eventually where you need to be. Some of it's not even necessary, but I thought I would share that with you all. For those of you that have a little more interest or trying to create your own business, this is something to keep in mind. If you go to some sort of financial advisor, they're going to run some form of what I would jokingly call retirement planning model for you. And it can be really good. If you haven't worked with a financial professional at some point already, you should do so. They can be really, really valuable. Now, I personally have my own little beast with them. I think they're a little bit too retirement centric. They're really stock market focused. What I do is I do the personal modeling for people. Like this is an example of this over here. This is a client who really wanted to focus on passive income. And so we built a model specifically for them to help them get to levels of passive income as quickly as possible so they could reach their goals as quickly as possible. One of the things I also do with people is I create what I call the family investment policy statement. This is something that the wealthiest families have as almost a requirement in their family. It's the codification of all the things that are in your head that are important for your life and for the investments that you make, and puts it actually down on paper and acts as a set of guardrails to help keep you and your family in line over time, especially if something were to happen to you. And so when I do planning with my clients, I at a minimum say, hey, if you're gonna go meet with a financial advisor, make sure you have some sort of personalized modeling done, not just a generic plan, not just some generic tool online. You want to get it personalized, but then also have some form of an IPS, investment policy statement, some sort of codification, some sort of agreement between you and a spouse or between you and your advisor in terms of what's important to me, why am I doing this, where is this going, what's the ultimate goals of all of this, and codify and actually put it down together so you can use that as those guideposts long term.